We've been having quite a few important and interesting guest speakers this quarter, and actually we have one more. So I would like to say a few words as an introduction about the work of Perry Hoberman, who's right here, and then I'll give the podium to Perry. So I think it's really, I'm very happy to have Perry here, and I'm sure you will be happy too. So Perry is one of the, shall I say, most visible people during the past 2 decades or whatever. Yeah, quite a long time in the field of media art in general. So early in his career, so Perry worked together with Laurie Anderson for quite a long time, and actually was the technical and to some extent also the artistic wizard behind those very famous tours and pieces that Laurie Anderson did. So much of those things, let me tell you, came from Perry Hoberman. And definitely at that time, Perry also launched his own career as a performance artist, as an installation artist, all those kinds of things that you will be hearing shortly. So Perry has shown a lot of work internationally, and he has won a number of really important prizes. Here in Los Angeles, 1995, I was a group of people organizing a big festival, interactive media festival, downtown LA, and we had a competition, and Perry's work called Barcode Hotel won the Grand Prix in that competition. Another important victory, so to say, happened in Japan, where there was a media biennale organized by an intercommunication center, a very important media center in Tokyo. And in this biennale, Perry also won the first prize for a piece that he's going to probably show you. And the interesting thing is that none of these festivals ever took place again. So this is Perry's specialty, to take the Grand Prix and shut down the festival. But we insist on continuing here. Anyway, and I'd also just briefly show you some publications about Perry's work. This is a catalog book which is called Unexpected Obstacles, the work of Perry Hoberman, 1982-1997, a big retrospective exhibition which was shown in Europe, which I curated. And then the more recent work was called Symptomatic, for another retrospective which was seen in England. Was it last year?
Yeah, last year.
Okay. Anyway, so maybe we can we pass this around so that people can have a look?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. And without anything else, so help me welcome Perry Hoberman.
Thank you, Erkki. And thanks, Victoria, for inviting me out here. I've been out here for about a week, and I've had a great time here and in Santa Barbara. So I'm going to try to give you an overview of 20-something years of work. We'll skip around. There'll be a lot of gaps. And as I'm going through it, I'll try to bring up some of the issues that the work hopefully engages. As a sort of a little more background, I was trained as a musician and a painter, and as soon as I got out of school, I immediately stopped doing both of those things. I worked a bit in the film industry in New York while I began to sort of figure out what I wanted to do for my own work, and very quickly kind of moved into a sort of A kind of media work. This is in the late 1970s, early 1980s. It was a while before I even thought about computers at all, much less used them. So, is the sound okay, by the way? Yeah, okay. So one of the things that you'll see in my work is that that I'm using digital technologies, but then also a lot of analog technologies, and I'm mixing them together a lot of the time. I find that when you put a lot of different systems together to make a larger system, things get a little more interesting. So the first thing I'm going to show you is a few things from the early 1980s. These were some pieces that I showed around then called Simulcasts. This one doesn't quite fit on the screen. These were wall sculptures, and they were objects that were at once projectors and screens. Each one had a number of slide projectors built into it, and they projected images at each other around the room. The images didn't change. I was interested in using the light as a kind of sculptural element, as a kind of, I wanted it to seem as though the images were sort of merged with the surfaces. The projectors are behind the surfaces of these warped screens, and they're projecting through plexiglass megaphones. And this came out of, I've been reading a lot about the history of television, and I've been thinking about broadcasting. And somehow this is the work that came out. I was thinking of these as transmissions of images across distances, and I was very interested in the way that transmissions could be distorted over distances. So I was trying to make a kind of optical analog of that kind of transmission.
So the projectors were high enough so they weren't in people's eyes?
Yeah, well, you can see in this picture, they're going over people's heads, exactly. They were mounted quite high on the wall. And that led me into some other work where, even though I had been making objects, I wanted to do something where I didn't have to build big, heavy objects that took a lot of time to build. I mean, partly it was just laziness, and partly it was because I thought there was too big a gap between these ephemeral projected images and these very solid objects. So I sort of reached back into my childhood and remembered a 3D movie I had seen called The Mask as a kid, and started to look into using stereoscopic techniques in the work. And that led to a series of installations and performances. The first one was based on the story of the Invisible Man. It was called Out of the Picture, and it was a multi-image slide projector show. You know, there was a quite developed technology in the 1970s and 80s for multi-image slide projection pieces. This is before video became cheap enough to be used in a kind of industrial context. And companies, when they had to do in-house presentations, would do slide projection pieces, you know, promotional things, and so on. And they developed some quite sophisticated, sort of dedicated computers to do multiple dissolves between dozens of projectors. So I used that technology with pairs of slide projectors to do these 3D pieces. Now, in this first one, you stood between, the projectors were on the floor at the opposite end of the room from the screen, so that when you walked in to look at the image, you cast a shadow on the screen. And that shadow, in fact, was stereoscopic because it was being projected by two light sources. You wore 3D glasses. So it's a very uncanny experience. It's like you see your shadow as a three-dimensional object. It's like looking at yourself from behind. If you hold your arm out this way, the shadow holds its arm out away from you. The choice of the Invisible Man as a theme came from thinking about the kind of classical situation of sitting in a theater watching a fictional film in which the actors playing the characters in the film pretend that they're not aware that they're being watched by an audience. So they act as they're unaware of the audience. The audience, on the other hand, gets to see the characters but can't interact with them, is passive. So I wanted to do something where I kind of reversed that and used a character that couldn't be seen, but would address the audience directly. So the audience became the thing that was visible. So I took bits and pieces of dialogue from the movie with Claude Rains and wrote some other material and reconfigured stuff and made a kind of second-person version of the Invisible Man, where the Invisible Man was talking to you and threatening you with his mad schemes of world conquest and so on. And I'll just show you a few more of these stereoscopic pieces that I did around then. I did another piece based on the Incredible Shrinking Man. This was a performance piece in which I actually appeared as the Incredible Shrinking Man. There I am. By projecting oversized images, oversized stereoscopic images, and putting myself in front of them, I could appear to be changing in size. I'll just find you another one. Here I am. That's me under that glass table. Now, these pieces were using science fiction movies and stories as kind of texts to be deconstructed and then put back together in a different shape and form. And I was interested in treating sort of the themes that emerged from these kinds of films in terms of their own context when they were made. The Incredible Shrinking Man, some of you must have seen it, is the sort of flip side of all the 1950s horror films where insects get exposed to radiation and grow to enormous size and threaten the world. In this case, the protagonist of the story is exposed to some radiation and then he starts to shrink, which is a nice sort of inversion that points to the insecurity of the American male at the height of the Cold War and under the threat of nuclear retaliation. Meanwhile, through all this, whenever I would run out of money, I made all these pieces that just needed light bulbs for their operation. These are a series of pieces called light leakers, and they're simple boxes that have a very precise point source of light, just a small light bulb with a small filament inside them, and then shapes that cast shadows on either side. And I was interested in both the whole, wait a minute, the dynamics of silhouettes, but also the way you would take these kind of iconic images and construct a relationship between them that somehow had to deal with the fact that there was this box that functioned as their source. Okay. So switch here to this. Just a minute. So I'm going to show you. So throughout the 1980s, I was making these stereoscopic slide pieces, both installations and performances and sculpture, and most of them involved these kind of narrative science fiction themes. Most of this work wasn't interactive per se. I mean, it wasn't really interactive performance in the sense that I wasn't triggering anything in the slide projections. I would just synchronize myself to them. I'm going to show you one piece from the mid-1980s called Return to Sender, which was a science fiction play that we presented in New York at La Mama ETC. This is me performing one of the monologues from the piece. Hopefully, yeah. Here it is.
I closed my eyes like two steel traps. Instantly, I was at the airport. The weather had changed. No plant life. A world made entirely of dull, gray concrete. What had they dreamed up for me this time? I would have to work fast. Locate the power supply. A green ocean teeming with electricity. Where were the others? Establish contact. Wake up. The same stars. Takes a lifetime for a shift in the scenery. A dead stillness at the speed of light. Remember where we were just now? Dreaming. A superhighway. A solid atmosphere. We move through it slowly, like lava. These people think we're ghosts, waiting to get out of here. The necessary paperwork. Is this a dialogue? Better make sure. I caught a glimpse of Z and N trying to blend in. We're working on their code. A few minor breakthroughs, but don't hold your breath.
Okay, so that's not my voice. You might have noticed. There were four actors in the play, and the voices were lip synced to the voices of 4 other actors. Actually, I haven't thought about this in a long time, but I remember that our logic in the voices, we used some fairly well-known actors for the voices of they were adult voices, and when we cast the play, we cast some young actors who we actually purposely cast small young actors because the stage we were working on was fairly small, and we thought that our projected 3D scenery would look bigger if we had smaller actors. Wow. So the projections here are stereoscopic, which you of course can't see here. The story was, well, it was quite silly, sort of silly. It was based on a Philip Dick novel called Maze of Death, very loosely. So that's a sort of taste of the kinds of things I was doing in the 1980s. And towards the end of the 1980s, I did start doing some interactive pieces, mostly quite simple, with not with. I started working with computers in the mid-1980s when the Amiga came out. I ran out and bought one, and I used it specifically to make images for these stereoscopic pieces. When you're making stereoscopic images, you can take them with 2 cameras or a stereo camera, or you can take a 2-dimensional image and shift elements to the left and right very carefully. And I've been doing that for years, and when I saw how much easier it was to do that on a computer, that's what sold me on computers. And of course, once you have a computer to do one thing, you start to use it to do other things. So I learned a bit of programming, and actually at one point had an idea for a stereoscopic paint program and worked with some developers in the late 1980s, and it died. It never happened. But I did start working with kind of electric eyes and switch matting. And switch matting goes under a carpet, and it's used for burglar alarms primarily, so that if somebody steps on it, they close the circuit and set off an alarm. And I did a couple of pieces using the switch matting as an input device for the Amiga. And due to the state of computers and the primitive state of my programming skills, there was inevitably quite a big gap between the action of stepping on a switch and something happening on the screen, and I was increasingly frustrated with this. And it occurred to me that I really didn't need the computer. I just needed the switches and I needed something to happen. So that led to that and some other things, including a sort of incurable tendency to buy old movie projectors and slide projectors, led to this piece called Faraday's Garden, which I'll show you now. So that's the switch matting on the floor. And whenever you step on on one of the copper bands, you turn on appliances that are close to you, so that it's very much like having a bubble of activity, of noise and light and music around you as you move through. I first did the piece in 1990 and did it many times over the next few years. But yeah, SIGGRAPH in 1990. Now, as you can see, it's very different when there's a single person walking through it. You have much more, the sounds and events are much more discrete. You have much more of a sense of what you're doing as opposed to what somebody else is. So everything in the piece is selected from the architecture for everything is sound, including the phonograph records. And each version of the album is a different configuration of platforms and switch matting. Each one is in some way a kind of garden of 20th century technology, which was the era of the small electric machine, now pretty much past us. In other words, I can't use, there are a lot of contemporary machines that I can't really use in this piece because if you just plug them in, nothing happens. You actually have to tell the little microprocessor in the machine what to do. And this is supposed to be very, very simple. It's just supposed to be electricity on and off. I have a vast collection of this stuff now. Much more than any human being needs. Anyway, so actually, you know, if you leave the sound up, I can control it from here. It's actually, because now I can't turn it back up when I want to. What's that? Some of it's actually in Europe right now. It still hasn't come back from a show. I'm supposed to arrange to have it shipped back. I've been putting that off. I have a basement full of it. Yeah. Anyway. So I'll just show you a couple of other images of other versions of the piece. Just a bit. Click around here a little more than I want to. Well, here. Okay, so, you know, in a way, this piece is kind of as direct, simple, and perhaps simple-minded kind of interactivity as you can get. It's just step on a switch, something happens. But I learned a lot from doing this piece. I have to say it turned out differently than I imagined it. The process of doing it over and over let me change it and develop it and kind of refine it. But what I found was, one of the things that I really liked was the fact that it was not that different than other installations I had done. You didn't have to start it when you entered. It didn't have a beginning, middle, or end. It didn't require a certain number of people to use it. It didn't stop working when there were too many people in it. So it had this nice kind of flexible way of dealing with its audience. I liked that it changed its behavior when there were just a few people or one person to when there were lots and lots of people. So all of that kind of happened automatically with this piece. And over the years, I've tried to use those kinds of parameters. I mean, those are sort of the goal, some of the goals in a lot of the other work I've done, to make things that are very informal, that don't require you to, that don't require you just to go through a sort of narrow channel of choices as an interactive experience. Let's see what's next. Okay. Well, I have to talk about this. The next project I'm going to tell you about is something that I did, began in '91 when I was in San Francisco teaching for a semester at the Art Institute. I was teaching a performance and video class and took my students on a number of field trips, including to Japantown to a karaoke bar. And they got very excited about karaoke. And we spent the entire semester making our own karaoke tapes. At the end of the semester, we put on, we turned the school cafe into a karaoke bar, and the rest of the school could come and sing along with our tapes. What happened was after watching, everybody by now knows what karaoke is. But we came up with this sort of method where we decided that any sound, image, text, and performance put together could be a karaoke tape. You didn't really have to know the words the way karaoke assumes that you know the melody of the pop song that you're about to sing, because you can do all kinds of other things besides sing on key. So I'll show you a sort of compilation of some of the tapes that we made and some of the performance stuff now. Okay, so here's one of our innovations, the multiple choice karaoke. And this is a dramatic karaoke.
Whose damn fault is that?
So, again, I learned a lot from this project, and in fact, I think I'm quite engaged in all these sort of questions of interactivity, but I'm not sure that interactivity is really the right word, even. I do have to turn this up for a second. This is a memorable performance. So karaoke is quite interesting because, of course, it's not interactive in the sense that it's a canned video experience, but it's, unarguably participatory. And you get to participate in this very, very significant way. You get to insert yourself into this kind of music video. You become part of it. You really define the performance. And I think that's probably, to me, as big a criteria for the kind of interactivity I'm interested in as anything else. So the more usual sense of interactivity is getting a kind of, a kind of feedback from something or being able to navigate through something are things that I think I'm a little less interested in. Okay, so I'll digress a little bit. I feel like looking at this. This is back from the 1980s again. We're going to go back in time. This was a performance piece. It's actually an instrument that I invented called the Projecto Bongo. And this was when I was working with computers, but very skeptical of them in a lot of ways. And the idea here was to do a kind of analog image processing. I'm going to skip through this a little bit. What you're looking at here is an image projected on a screen that's being bounced off of a stretched piece of reflective mylar with audio pickup on it. And I'm hitting the mylar from both sides, front and back. Manually, yeah. It's just a slide projection. Also, I was doing a lot of work with advertising imagery at the time, and I saw this as a way of kind of getting revenge on it, sort of. Okay, and I'm just going to show you one other performance. This one's related to Faraday's Garden. This was called the...
Harry, I didn't understand that to 100%, how you made that. Can you explain it again?
It's a secret. It's a secret. No, it's... How to explain? You have a projector here.
Yeah.
You have a piece of, basically a drum with a mylar head here. Image bounces off of the mylar onto the screen. If you hit it from the front around the image, you can make the image vibrate. The mylar isn't, you tighten and loosen the mylar depending on what effect you want. And if you press it from the back or tap it from the back, you create those kind of black holes.
So what you're showing is the projected image.
I'm showing the projected image. I don't have footage of the mylar. Okay. So here's another, this is an appliance performance called the Symphonic Appliance Orchestra. This is from about 10 years later. We've thrown chronology to the winds. So I'm controlling these essentially walls of appliances from the PowerBook, sequencing them. Mixer duet. And the big back massager solo. So the audience is on the opposite side of this wall of appliances from me. And they're amplified with a combination of microphones and pickups and so on. So that piece came about because there were a couple of instances when I did Faraday's Garden at universities and colleges, and an enterprising dance professor would, this actually happened twice, would have their class come and choreograph dances for the piece. And also just from walking through it myself and sort of tapping out rhythms and so on. I was, there seemed to be some possibilities for, a kind of more organized appliance music there. Okay, so in 1992, I was invited up to the Banff Center in Canada to do a project as part of a group of residencies called Art and Virtual Environments. And the piece I ended up doing was called Barcode Hotel, and I'll just show it to you and talk about it after you see it. So there are 5 barcode wands hanging down from the ceiling. There are barcodes printed on a series of tables on the walls, every available surface. By scanning the various barcodes, you can control the actions of objects on the screen in a stereoscopic 3D, real-time 3D world. The cubes that are sitting on the tables are the kinds of, they're sort of like proper nouns. By scanning one of them, you bring an object into existence, you sort of birth it. And then all the other barcodes function as verbs and adjectives, essentially. You tell your object what you want it to do, how you want it to behave. And the objects have very short lifespans. They live for about 5 minutes. There's a spiky light bulb attacking a plaid paper bag. You could also affect the environment in different ways, changing the background and so on. Barcode seemed to be interesting because it's a technology that's not really, it's been around for a long time and we're completely used to it. It's kind of ubiquitous. It's on every product. But it's actually a very nice way to input information into a computer, and it leads to a particular kind of interface where instead of having very limited, as they say, real estate on a computer screen, you can print. It's cheap to print lots and lots of barcode and have lots of different commands, and you can have everything available all at once. So that leads to again a situation where there's no navigation really. You just can choose from anything at any time, and it was programmed to take that into account. So whatever you scanned would interrupt whatever else was going on with your object. But of course, scanning a barcode, it's like pushing a button. It's a discrete event. So a lot of the time in between, while you're scanning barcodes, the objects are kind of on their own. And they did have, they did have their ideas of their own in their own primitive way. So instead of it seeming like a kind of surrogate self or an avatar, it was more like having a pet that, listened to you sometimes and didn't other times. And again, this was a way of making an interface for a number of people at once. It was also a bit of a kind of lampoon of the standard VR interface of the day with the head-mounted display and the glove. Instead, you were just a, really cool data entry clerk. So anyway, that piece, the attraction of the Art in Virtual Environments project was that you got to go up to the Banff Center, where they had a number of programmers and designers. They had a Silicon Graphics Onyx, which was kind of the top-of-the-line graphics computer of the day. Costs, I don't know, $500,000 or something. And that kind of, I'd say, that was sort of my introduction to higher end computers. And I kind of, at that point, longed for the day when I would be able to do that kind of work on my own home computer. And that day sort of arrived a couple years ago. And now I can do graphics just like that without having all those programmers and everything, which is very nice. So I will now, let me just think if I'm leaving anything out. No, I'll show you some more recent work now. Oh, wait, no, I'm going to show you some other stuff first. How much time do we have? How much longer should we go?
Just keep going.
Okay. Okay. So here's a piece from a few years ago in a show that Erkki curated called Alien Intelligence. This piece is called Zombiac, which is an acronym that stands for something that I can't remember now. And these are old PCs that have had the guts taken out of them. There's no central processing unit. There's nothing inside the box. There's just a very bright light bulb behind the screen and a microcontroller with a lot of sensors that reacts to a number of stimuli so that it tries to engage passerbys in conversation, usually unsuccessfully. I had the idea that the act of taking the guts out of the computer was similar to what a Haitian witch doctor would do when they turn somebody into a zombie. It became something that was, had no will of its own, but was very powerful. So the light bulb was supposed to be the equivalent of the binary on-off of the computer, but all it could do was go on and off and emit these sounds. They had a number of different kinds of sensors, passive infrared, sonar, sound, and they rotated on stepper motors to try to face you and address you. And if you answered back to them, they would then flash at you again and keep going. But of course, the conversation was something that only they understood.
At the time you said that the language they speak is Modemese.
Modemese, yes, it's Modemese. And also this piece, there's a phrase that I don't actually know who thought of it first, but it seems to be around. It's the opposite of artificial intelligence, artificial stupidity, which Maggie Morse used in an essay, I think, and I've seen it other places as well. But I was thinking about these concepts of artificial stupidity with that piece. I mean, in the sense that most of what we try to think of as artificial intelligence is actually quite stupid. So, we have to make a lot of accommodations to it to consider it intelligent. So I wanted to sort of bring out that aspect of artificial intelligence. Okay. So at this point, I'm just sort of skipping around, showing you the more recent work. In recent years, I've pretty much been focusing on these fairly large installations. So the next one is systems maintenance, and I'm going to keep the sound. There's not really much sound to this piece anyway, but I'll keep the sound off because there's a voiceover. Now, this piece was investigation of the intersection between physical and virtual space, which is something that I'm increasingly interested in. It sort of shows up in the earlier work, but it's getting kind of maybe a little more direct or specific at this point. There were 3 versions of this ensemble of furniture the images from the three versions were combined into a single image on the screen. So what you're seeing here is an image of a essentially life-size furniture, slightly over life-size, a scale model, which is 1/8 the size of the full-size model that sits on a tabletop, and a virtual version of the furniture, which lives on a computer. The three images are combined so that what you get is this hybrid space with, as you can see, hands reaching into it, bodies and figures and gadgets from the computer version. There's a camera for each version in the appropriate position so that if you try hard enough, you can line up the three versions of the furniture, making it appear that there's only one room on the screen. But of course, it's very, very difficult to do that because everyone is constantly rearranging the three versions of the furniture. The big furniture on the ground is on wheels, on casters, so that it can be moved around easily. The camera is mounted on a big arm so that it can be pulled around the space, creating a kind of 360-degree dolly shot. The computer version is on a rotating tabletop that can be turned to rotate the point of view, which is communicated to the computer via a rotary encoder. You use the space ball that she was using there to manipulate the furniture. And the model table can also be rotated. So there's a lot of variables. Now, even though, as I say, the kind of implied goal is to line up the furniture, in fact, it almost never happens. And in fact, the image is much less interesting once you line everything up. It's actually much more interesting when it's a kind of somewhat almost like a cubist space, like three different states of the same room. And the interesting thing is that as you walk into it or put your hand into it or play with the computer, it's very hard to tell what's in the same world as you until you start to manipulate it. In other words, you'll see yourself in a sea of sort of transparent furniture, and if you touch one, you can tell that that's in the world, but if you put your hand there and there's nothing there, it's in one of the other worlds. Now, because I didn't really want to put the pressure on my audience to feel like this was some, onerous task where they had to line everything up, we hired these maintenance workers, and they're the guys in the black jumpsuits with the walkie-talkies. And their job is to try to line up all the furniture while staying out of the way of the public, not interacting with the public at all. They were instructed to take their job very seriously. Their model of behavior was air traffic controller. So this was supposed to be a sort of, serious job that took real concentration, and they would communicate and coordinate their actions through the walkie-talkies. So they're trying to line everything up while the public is this sort of continuous source of disorder, moving everything around, doing whatever they want with it. And ultimately, the idea was to make a situation where, what's in fact happening is that you're sort of seeing yourself in a kind of combination of physical and virtual world. But I wanted to create a sense that the virtual world was maybe bleeding out into this one, so that when you saw yourself on the screen in one form or another, you would imagine these other worlds as being just as real as your own image. Okay. I have to say I'm used to giving talks where I just let people shout out questions.
Talk a little bit about what inspired you to do that piece. What were you reading at the time? What were you thinking about? You read a lot.
I read a lot. I don't remember what I was reading. The piece came out of an earlier idea for a piece where essentially I wanted, again, in the same way that a lot of this work comes out of a kind of various kinds of reversals, and the way the Invisible Man piece came out of a kind of reversal. This reversal was, it seemed very easy to imagine, how do you say? a situation where you would manipulate a small or a computer-based interface to control something larger, like telepresence robots, for instance. You know, you have something that's sort of less consequential, you know, just your own hands and eyes, and you, for instance, might wear a computer, a stereoscopic viewer and some gloves and control a robot that's 10 times as big as you. And it's the only way that one can, you know, directly control a robot like that and have it do, you know, the kinds of things that you might want to do. I wanted to reverse that. I wanted to have, well, actually, now that I'm thinking, it's not really, I didn't really want to reverse that so much as I just wanted to do something where you would take, I actually am trying to remember this project as I'm talking, so it's a little hard, but, well, this piece was done in 97 or 98, but the idea was much, much earlier. In any case, the original idea was to have a small model in the center of a room of real furniture, you know, big, heavy shelving units and desks, and have a team of people that would be going around with a forklift. The audience would be able to move the real furniture, I mean the model furniture, and then it would be the job of the guys with the forklift to make the room around you match this little model of the room. I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, I can mention things, you know, I can mention not necessarily what I was reading at the time, but I can mention some books that it sort of brings to mind. Because what, you know, especially doing something where you are focusing on a kind of modeling and a sort of multiple layers of models that affect each other and control each other. Let's see. Well, there's a very interesting novel from late 60s or early 70s called Simulacrum 3 by Daniel Galloway. The name of the novel is Simulacrum 3. The author is Daniel Galloway. It was made into a film recently called The 13th Floor, which wasn't very good, but it was earlier made into a really good film by Fassbinder called World on a Wire, which is kind of hard to see. It was a TV series, but it's about, I mean, the story is of people, strange things happen. People suspect, you know, somebody gets, it's, you know, the ultimate paranoid fantasy. Somebody suspects that something's going on, and eventually he realizes, or they realize, that their world is a model that's being controlled from the outside by some other larger world. So, you know, ideas like that. That's the only thing I can think of right now for that one. But anyway, as I was saying, I'm used to people just sort of shouting out questions, but I was told that we needed to do something with a microphone for this. So,
I'll shout one out.
Okay. Feel free.
Looking at each of these projects, if there
But
was
the mic is here.
the mic is
So shout out questions, but just do it really slowly.
In each of these projects, did you always have a team of people, and what kind of people would be involved?
It varies. It depends on, you know, a lot of, you know, pretty predictable factors like time and budget. Some of them I do completely on my own. Some of them I have fairly extensive teams of people to work on them. It really depends. Also, you know, it depends very much on the requirements of the piece. In some cases, I can do everything myself, and whether that's a good idea or not, that's what I end up doing. And then sometimes it just requires certain skills that I don't have, and then I end up collaborating. Also, I enjoy collaborating on a more sort of equal level with other artists, which I found works out very well sometimes and doesn't work out at all at other times. I've had very good luck collaborating with composers. What's going on?
They think you're ready. Continue with your project. I find that.
Okay. All right, so I'm going to show you first I'm going to show you, actually this is the most recent project. And systems maintenance. That's very dangerous. So, does everyone understand the setup here on tape? Any questions? Well, the barcode scanner is reading the barcodes that are printed on the screen as it swings around. It reads about 4 a second. It's an omnidirectional barcode scanner, so it can read from any direction. No, the barcodes are printed on the screen. Then the screen is laying flat on the floor. There's a projector above projecting straight down on top of the barcodes. Well, as I found out, a hairdryer is not strong enough to make that thing move. In the proposal, I proposed hairdryers, having used them for much smaller pieces that are similar. And of course, a hairdryer is not strong enough. So we ended up using a pneumatic air system. I actually, when I discovered that the hairdryer wasn't strong enough, I found some really nice electric leaf blowers that were really strong. leaf blowers. And I wanted to use those, but they wouldn't let me because, well, in fact, it was in the same room with a lot of other pieces, including a very calm, quiet piece of Bill's. So, so we ended up with the pneumatic system, which works very well. You know, it does. Unfortunately, in this case, this is footage from the show in Bradford, and in that show we had this enormous space to put these 3 installations, and we didn't want to break it up at all. But unfortunately, one of the other pieces used ultrasound sensing, position sensing system, and this completely scrambled that every time. So we had to put a partition between the 2 pieces. No, this is the most roundabout, impractical 2-dimensional tracking system probably ever built. It's just location. Each barcode has an XY coordinate. So it just tells the computer where the scanner is at any given moment. Then the images are projected. This is running in Macromedia Director using the Havoc 3D Physics Extra, which is really great. Again, I mean, this is the kind of project that would have required a team just a few years ago, and I did this. I was able to do most of this on my own. Yeah. The background images?
How the background images behind the barcodes are correlating with the piece itself.
Well, there are these. It's kind of like a non-linear or non-hierarchical pinball game. There's these little bumpers, like in a pinball game, they're virtual objects that are attached with virtual springs that sit in certain positions on the surface. And when you hit, there are, I think, 6 of them, and 3 of them, each time you hit one, an object will fall down from above. And the 3 others, when you hit one, a new background will slide into place. How did I choose the objects? Just completely kind of intuitively. I wanted very kind of ordinary objects, just a sort of, in a sense, I wanted it to look like just sort of a lot of junk.
But so is it real-time 3D?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the sort of mechanism of the piece is that this real object, the pendulum, which consists of the barcode scanner, bumps into virtual objects and pushes them around and bats them out of the way and so on. So again, it's a kind of, trying to bring the physical world into relationship to this virtual world. The other thing, another thing that I'm really quite interested in is horizontal projections on floors and tabletops. I think they have they give you a very, very kind of strange, unfamiliar space, even though, I'm using regular sort of, perspective here. My theory about it, and I don't know if it's a good theory, but when the human race invented pictures, they had to leave, there are 3 dimensions in the 3-dimensional world. They decided which dimension to leave out. They decided that they could leave depth out. So you've got, this and this, but you have to fake this. And that's where we get perspective and occlusion and all kinds of things that cue us into thinking that 2-dimensional pictures are 3-dimensional. Now, when you turn an image flat on the ground, you have depth, you've got depth back, but you no longer have height. So you have to fake height. And even though really all you're doing is transforming a plane 90 degrees, it's a very different experience. And perspective feels very different when you look at it flat on the ground. Of course, there's no, up or down from any particular angle. You can look at it from all around it.
It feels more forced. Like picture paintings on a ceiling or whatever. The perspective feels more forced.
Yeah, yeah. And the shadows, the cast shadows, which are just a trick. You can't really do real-time cast shadows, but you can fake it really well. they, you know, they serve to sort of separate the objects out from the background very nicely. And as I've been using these cast shadows a lot in recent pieces, and I hadn't really thought about all of this. There's this thread that sort of runs through the work of shadows and silhouettes that someone pointed out when I gave a talk the other day that I hadn't really thought about. Okay, I'll show you one more piece, and then I think we should really take more questions and so on. So this piece was originally done in '95 with another artist named Nick Phillip in San Francisco, and I reworked it a couple years ago and showed it in New York.
Vax is freaking out that SQL. CDI is trashing AAB. Your OLA is killing a CEO. That MPEG is encrypting their C++.
The entire system is surrounded by fields of intensified gamma radiation. Ladies and gentlemen, I will try to make this as simple as possible.
All systems are functional.
Yeah. Well, we've done, I've used different schemes over the years. The current one, there are shock sensors on each of the keyboards. They're attached to the frame at the top with 2 bolts, and when you hit them, it's another anti-burglar technology. You put it on windows. When somebody smashes a window, it closes the circuit. We've used we tried a lot of different things with this. Before that, I'd hacked each keyboard so that if you hit any of the keys on the keyboard, it would close the circuit. But the problem was that the keys, over the course of time that the installation was up, the keys would pop off the keyboard. So at the end of a week or two, it would look like, like somebody, a set of teeth with lots of them gone. And it had to be installed in this show for about a year up at Mass MoCA. So what we did was hot glued every single key in the down position, so the keys don't move at all now, and then put the shock sensors on the back. The shock sensors then go into a little mic. I think it's 3 basic stamps, and we're just reading the input from each of those circuits, and then feeding that into the computer. The piece runs, again, in Macromedia Director. This is the kind of piece that I tend to, each time I show it, I add new material and try to kind of bring it up to date. When we first did it, both Nick and I were working in Silicon Valley and in little offices, and we were completely frustrated with the whole, here's all the technical information. We were very frustrated with the fact that computers were always crashing, and yet your sort of physical interaction with the computer was very, just these small gestures. I mean, you couldn't express your anger at the computer in any real way, so we thought this would be a kind of therapeutic device for, harried workers in the digital age. And then I showed it in the next time I showed it sort of in the midst of the whole .com boom, and added some other material that kind of had to do with that. And then when I last showed it, the .com boom was kind of over. And this version is about 3 years old.
So when you hit a certain keyboard, it'll trigger.
Well, in this case, each keyboard is keyed to a particular sequence. On the most recent version, there are these larger. Actually, I think I can show you. Wait a minute. Just a second. The only thing is I have to, just a second. I just have to change our screen arrangement here. It's maybe more trouble than it's worth, but I've started, so I can't stop. I'm not sure if this is the right resolution. Yeah, it's not the right resolution, but here if you hit one of these, it starts. I don't know which keys go with saying. So one of them, if you hit it, you'll get mostly those kinds of messages. And then I'm just shooting blind here. It's hopeless. Anyway, now I can't stop it. There. Perfect. Anyway, okay. So I'd be happy to take questions. I mean, I could show you more work if you want, but I would rather take questions. Oh, well, I can show you something, and I can tell you about a couple other things that are coming up. A lot of the more recent work has involved these sort of hybrid virtual physical kind of objects, mostly screens, but for instance, the keyboards are matched to the kind of projections on the keyboards, so that you don't really think of the projection becomes sort of part of the keyboard. The barcode screen has the barcodes printed on it, but so you get this kind of collage image between a projection and a real object. And so I'm doing some more projects like that. Probably the next one I'll do is a piece called Table of Contents.
Table what?
Of Contents. It's a nice basic title for something. It involves boxes, white boxes, that are about this sort of the size and shape of cereal boxes, and using multiple projectors from kind of all around the tabletop and image tracking devices in the boxes. I'm going to project the labels, the surfaces, onto the boxes. Boxes will have speakers in them. I don't know why I'm talking about this. I never talk about projects before I've done them, but you asked. The boxes will have speakers in them, and essentially you'll be able to kind of you'll be able to shake them, pour out the contents. The contents will then be projected onto the table. It's, I'm not even sure if it's really going to work. It requires a really, really good precise tracking. But I want to try. And then another piece that I'm planning to do is a kind of remake of the Invisible Man piece with the three-dimensional shadows, but I haven't started that yet. I've done some preliminary experiments with the table of contents piece, and everything seems sound. And then, let's just switch this yet again. Just a minute. Okay. I'll just show you a little bit of this performance piece that I've been showing around and working on. I mean, I can't really perform it, but I'll just sort of show you what the software does. In fact, it's the software that I've been using to show you most of the QuickTime movies. It's just essentially a program that allows me to manipulate multiple QuickTime movies. The piece is called Let's Make a Monster, and I'm using lots of footage from from Mad Doctor, Mad Scientist movies, and manipulating it with a kind of control panel of dials and switches and levers and so on. I sit facing the screen, so my back is to the audience, and I'll just show you a little bit of it. I haven't done this in a while, so I probably won't even exactly remember But yeah, this is unfortunately I've been playing with the software and it doesn't entirely work right now. Yeah, they're not all supposed to sound like Donald Duck.
What you are doing is mad. It is diabolic. Tampering with powers reserved to God.
That is good. That is very good. That is just what I am.
Well, I will not permit it.
Well, in any case, just to give you a little taste, it's hundreds of these clips. I mean, I can show you lots more of the clips if you want. And they're combined actually with lots of material from sort of, you know, corporate reports from genetic biotechnology companies and, you know, material like this, and I don't know.
There it is. There it is.
Are we then country doctors? You do not realize what we have here. In our very hands, we have the cosmic force of creation itself. In our very hands, we can shape life, take it apart, put it together again.
Meanwhile, I have a number of video cameras on myself, so I'm mixing in my own image with this stuff and fragmenting it and so on, while I'm reading all kinds of texts from sort of pop science literature and about, you know, the cryonics and you know, basically today's real life mad science.
Just to follow up, in terms of your process, when you come up with an initial concept, how true does it stay to that concept, and how much is it influenced by, you know, what you could do technically?
When you say how true, do you mean how much does it stay the same?
Yeah, I mean, are you working really at an intuitive level and sort of shaping and shifting stuff a lot throughout the process, or do you start with a pretty clear map and stick to it, or?
I would say generally it changes quite a bit. I'm not someone who really kind of works everything out and has a rationale for everything beforehand. A lot of times I'll start something for one reason, and by the time I'm done, you know, decide that I've done it for another reason. I'm not, there are times when I'll have an idea and just sort of, it sort of seems clear-cut enough to me, kind of, you know, straightforward enough that there's really, it doesn't change. There are other times when I'll be going much, sort of, you know, stumbling around much more blindly with a sort of germ of an idea, in which case it can change quite a bit. I mean, a lot of it is because until you actually present this work to an audience, to, you know, if it's an interactive piece, until you see people really using it, until it's fully installed, it's very hard to notice everything about it. It's hard to I mean, it probably is easier for some people, but for me, it's actually very hard for me to imagine what's going to, you know, where the emphasis is going to be. Also, the pieces do change depending on who's using them. So, some, you know, especially you'll get groups of people sometimes that really sort of work together very well, other times less well. So, depending on whether I've sort of watched people using it and I think it's kind of going just the way I want it to or not, I might decide to change something in it. I mean, I'm not really, it's hard for me to think of any of these works as being really finished. I mean, certainly some of them I haven't worked on in years because, for various reasons, either not a operating system that I have access to, or I haven't had time, or I haven't been interested. And then some of them, I keep on changing them. So I would say that the answer would be more that they don't stay. I mean, I don't feel any, let me put it this way, I don't feel any obligation to keep them close to what an original idea or proposal was.
I'll just keep
Go on.
Do you have a philosophy about how you approach the idea of audience? Do you have a target audience in mind, or is your work site specific in any way when you're making it? Or
the first question, do I have an ideal audience? My ideal audience would be an audience that is really engaged and really intelligent and understands my work in ways that I don't understand it, so they can tell me something about it.
But it seems like kids love it.
Kids are close to that sometimes. I mean, I don't have an idea of audience. I mean, they're aimed at a general audience, not necessarily a particularly, art-savvy audience or media-savvy audience. I want them to be fairly accessible, although I'm not trying to dumb them down, or I don't do anything in the work thinking of, well, someone's not going to get this. I mean, I do have ideas about interaction that I think probably relate to my idea of an audience. And in that sense, my audience is myself. In that, I think I have this idea that when you do something in a piece, you should get something back right away. I mean, I don't know if this is good or bad, but it's just the way I think. It's the way I think about it. I mean, for a couple of reasons. One is that I've experienced too many installations that are ostensibly interactive, where I wave my arms around and do stuff, and I have no idea what I'm doing, what effect I'm having, and I'm not really anxious to put other people through that. Another reason would be that I feel like there's it's a kind of transaction. I mean, one of the things that happens in this kind of work is that you're tracking people. You're reducing them to, sets of data points, and it's very hard to kind of make something that addresses people as people. So, the more precisely, the more precisely you sense what people are doing and so on, the more you're reducing them in a way. So I want to make sure that I'm sort of giving something back in that transaction, so that you're sort of, it's kind of like a deal where you agree to be reduced in that way, but you get something back in terms of some sort of insight, or a good chuckle or something.
I had a couple questions on this newest piece.
Mm-hmm.
How is it going to be presented? Is it a projection, or?
It's a projection. It's me sitting at a small table with it's an apparatus that I built about this size with a lot of dials on it. And I'm just sitting facing the screen with cameras on my face, so that essentially it's like the video, I can be sort of backstage, because you're not looking at my face except when I want you to. And then I mix my images in. I'm sort of playing a kind of archetypal mad scientist, reading these texts and sort of chuckling
And what kind
and putting on disguises and so on.
What kind of control? What are you affecting on the images?
I have kind of complete control over
placement or speed?
Placement, speed, everything.
Oh.
I mean, I have this.
And it's all through Director, or?
Yeah, it's all through Director. Here, I'll show you the interface. How can I do this? Just a second.
I know I'm asking these practical questions.
No, it's fine.
Students always, and myself, are always struggling.
Okay. Here. Oh, now what's going on? All right, just a second. Okay, let me see. I'm not sure what's going to happen now. Oh yeah, this will show you. This is what I'm looking at when I'm performing it. I've more or less taken every little thing I can think of doing to a QuickTime movie and to images in Director and made myself an interface. So, I mean, unfortunately, you can't. And I have banks of different different movies. So it's not, all I have to do is select a movie, and then I can. I mean, it's playing on the other screen now, so I can, you know, do whatever I want to the size, the speed.
So each performance will be different than...
Absolutely, totally different. I mean, Director has, in some ways it has very good QuickTime control, and in other ways it has very limited QuickTime control. There's a lot of things in the more recent versions of QuickTime that it doesn't, you can't access certain layers, and you can't pan the audio, and you know, there's a lot of stuff that I want to do that I can't really do. But I mean, I keep adding to this interface. It's, as you can see, it's absolutely insane. And I, you know, at times I get the performance is just me getting confused. It's improvisational, with sections that I've sort of figured out and rehearsed. But no, it's purposely improvisational. I mean, it involves. I mean, I'm sort of, in part because parts of it are supposed to be funny, so I'm sort of listening to the audience, and you know, I want it to seem kind of like an experiment, like a sort of, you know, where what I'm doing is analogous to the sort of, you know, over-the-top experiment that some of the characters in the films are doing.
And then on another direction,
yeah,
you're working really physically with, you know, physical stuff that people manipulate. Mm-hmm. So in the installations, is there how do things not break constantly, or do they? And do you have ways to?
They do. Well, do they break? I mean, certainly in Cathartic User Interface, as I said, the keys popped off the keyboards, and for years I just said, well, that's a good example of a kind of breakdown that the piece can accommodate. You know, the keys pop off, but the piece keeps working, and that's sort of true. But I don't know. A lot of it, you know, of course, I don't have the kinds of budgets that one would need to make these so, you know, bulletproof that they would work no matter what you did to them. But I try to kind of, you know, work things out, you know, as intelligently as I can so that they don't, you know, because, I mean, well, what can you say? Let's see. Let me think about each piece and what's happened to it. Workaholic has pretty much, I don't think anyone's broken anything on that, but that's just air currents. Actually, I take that back. The little plastic dome over the barcode scanner, which is supposed to protect the barcode scanner, at some point, they blew it so hard that it smashed into the railing and broke. So yeah, they did break that. Somebody climbed up on Timetable, which I didn't show you, which is the piece I did for the ICC. It's a ring of table with a screen in the center. They climbed up and fell through the screen, a kid. So that broke. And the dials on Timetable, these little dials, rotary encoders, they'll freeze up if they get used too much. I mean, all the pieces are very modular. I always have spare parts. Like for Workaholic, there are 8 modified hair dryers in the piece, and I built 12. You know, I built half as many again extra. Things break, but you know, I don't know. I don't know what to say. I mean,
do you test them a lot before you have people use them?
I almost never have an opportunity to do that because of time constraints and because I don't really have, you know, that's usually not built into a budget
so
that you get a rehearsal space to set something up beforehand. So I'm fairly notorious for working up to and sometimes over, you know, the last minute trying to get something done.
I have another question regarding your...
Here.
Regarding your performance piece, what is your experience with the copyrights if you use these existing clips?
I mean, I did a lot of work in the 1980s that used copyrighted material, and I never did anything about it, and I'm still not doing anything about it. I mean, my experience is that if you're making money off of something, they notice and will get you, and if you're not, they don't really care. I mean, that might be different now. Certainly the situation's changed a lot since the 1980s. I mean, I'm just, this piece partly came about because, I mean, in fact, this piece and the idea of redoing the Invisible Man piece, I mean, I think it's apparent that, I mean, it became apparent to me in looking over the work that I've done that it's moved away from any kind of sort of narrative into this kind of more abstract realm of objects and action and behavior. And I kind of missed some of the stuff that I'd done earlier. And it occurred to me that before, when I did these pieces that used film clips and so on, I would have to get catalogs from film rental companies, rent a 60mm film and an optical printer, make slides from them. It was a very involved process to appropriate images from films, and now it's quite easy with videos and DVD. So I've just been.
Would you be scared, for example, if something like that turns into a larger theater production and will be booked for a longer time? Would you be scared or that this creates problems?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I guess so.
I'm asking.
I don't know. I mean, I suppose I could. There's certainly one could make a case under fair use that I'm using very small clips of these things, and I am, I'm not simply ripping them off. I'm using them to make some sort of, hopefully artistic statement. But people haven't won. I mean, there have been fair use lawsuits in recent years that the person who's arguing to appropriate material haven't won. I don't know. I mean, one interesting sort of peripheral fact to that is that I've been since I started doing this piece, I've been researching horror films a lot and trying to track down some that I haven't seen. And there are a number of websites that sell videos that you can't find anywhere else where they're clearly just dubbing them. And they're regular commercial websites you can buy stuff online. And they clearly don't have the rights to these things, and yet nobody's shutting them down. So I'm not exactly sure what the situation there is. I mean, one of them has a disclaimer where they say something about how these films are just completely unavailable otherwise. But I don't know what, that doesn't seem very defensible. I don't know. But yeah, I would, if this piece became, a sensation and played at, a big theater or something. I mean, it wouldn't really matter if I worried about it. I have a feeling that the institution would either not let me do it or would make me secure the rights, which would probably make it impossible to do the piece, because it's got so much material from all over the place. So. I don't know, but I mean, I do feel that it's this is sort of it's a genre of work that I'm very interested in, and I feel like people should be able to do this kind of work. It's just that I know that they're I know that you're not really supposed to, but there's just no way I can really worry about it too much.
Do you have a favorite piece or one that you think was particularly successful, and if so, why?
Well, it's usually the last piece I've done, the most recent piece, and in this case, it's Workaholic is the last completed piece, so that's my favorite piece right now. I mean, I have to admit, I'm fonder of some pieces than other pieces. Generally, when they seem to be kind of more realized in the sort of sense that I want them to be. I'm not really sure how to put it, but there are pieces that I'm more comfortable showing over and over again, and pieces that I'd rather just forget about. But that has nothing to do with how successful the pieces are, or you know, which pieces get shown. It's just something I kind of keep to myself.
Do you call yourself a media artist?
Yeah, I guess.
You've been doing
I call myself an installation artist. If people leave it up to me, I usually say installation artist, and then sometimes I say installation and performance artist.
And you also talk a lot about technology in your work, too. The work is actually making comments about technology. Mm-hmm. So after doing this for so long, since 70s, somewhere in the 70s, do you feel, where do you think this art is going? Do you feel like it's been growing, or it's being restricted?
Media art as a field?
Or installation art, or...
Well, installation art is, you know, I mean, it overlaps, but it's a completely different field than media art.
In that it's more acceptable in museums, or?
Well, no, because there are plenty of, I think there's plenty of work that's installation that wouldn't qualify really as media.
Yeah.
That's simple.
So you use media, I think, all the time.
Well, I use media, yeah, most of the time. Bye. Yeah. Where do I think it's going? It's, I think that as time goes on, there's less and less reason for it to be exhibited, sort of cordoned off from the rest of art. I think, you know,
is that really happening, do you think?
Not really that much, but some. I mean, I don't think it makes so much sense to build big new institutions to show media art, so much as it makes sense to, when you build a museum, to think about media art, you know, when you build it. I guess I think it's, you know, becoming more ubiquitous. I think in a lot of cases, you know, certainly there's whole fields where everybody in that field uses digital technology, and yet nobody thinks of it as digital technology. For instance, most music, graphic design, and so on. But I mean, I'm very interested in all the issues that sort of surround technology, the history of technology, and so on. And that would seem, you know, I think because technology is so central to the way we experience the world and our senses of ourselves and how we relate to other people, that it's work that deals with issues of technology, I think one could make meaningful groupings of that kind of work, but I don't think that necessarily is work that uses those technologies all the time. You know, but I don't have a. I mean, to some extent, it's not something that I'm categorizing things. Isn't my first sort of line of thought. You know.
So it's not like you feel a frustration, like the work hasn't been shown more than you'd like.
Well, of course I do. Everybody does. I mean, everybody, you know, complains about one thing or another, and certainly as time has gone on, you know, I mean, for the last 10 years, I've shown much more in Europe than I have in the States, and it's, you know, of course, since I live in New York, it would be nice if the New York galleries and museums were doing, you know, intelligent shows, and hopefully including me once in a while. But so no, I'm not really, you know, I think it has a ways to go. I mean, obviously, the museums tend to be pretty clueless, and New York, you know, compared to certainly sort of the level of discourse and thought in Europe is pretty behind. So no, I think there's lots of things could be much better, but I can't really, you know, I really can't complain because I'm getting opportunities to show, and I more or less am able to support myself through making work and commissions and teaching, of course.
Do you have a gallery?
Yeah, I've shown at Postmasters Gallery for
so they
a number of
represent
years.
you. They act as your dealer.
They represent me. I've never sold that much work, so. They're a very interesting gallery in New York that shows a lot. They're one of the only galleries that's been showing a lot of net art and media art, and they have they're very supportive even if it's if it's work they believe in, even if it doesn't sell, they'll continue to show it. Yeah, I was quite lucky to find them.
Any other questions? So, okay.
Yes, I think I'll just say that I think we would definitely like to have Perry back here for more than just 1.5 hours, and hopefully will happen soon. So thank you very much, Perry Hoberman.
Thank you.